why we can trust in that scripture because of the time. Why can we trust the apostles' accounts?
Well, so every eyewitness is tested in a number of categories. And in California, we have a set of jury instructions. There are about 13 or 14 instructions that jurors can consider when they've got an eyewitness on the stand. They can ask these questions in their own mind. Is he this, 13, 14 questions? Well, they come down to 4 broad categories. Were they really there to see what they said they saw? Can they be verified in some way? Have they changed their story over time? And do they have a bias, some reason to lie to me? So we have to test eyewitnesses in those 4 categories. And so I simply said, okay, if you test the gospel, are they written early enough to have been written by eyewitnesses? Now, a lot of folks who are really only in the last couple of hundred years have made claims that these gospels are written in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century. You can't trust them. Now, that's actually not true. They are written very early, which is why the first paragraph of Luke's gospel makes sense. You don't have to twist it and distort it and try to misread it in order to have it make sense. He's telling you that he was not somebody who knew Jesus personally. He arrived around the same time that Paul saw Jesus and eventually joined Paul on many missionary trips. But Luke tells us that he was alive at the time the eyewitnesses were alive, and he spoke to those eyewitnesses of Jesus to write his gospel. But that means that the gospel has to be written within the lifetime of eyewitnesses. And that's something of the first question. Were you really there to see what you said you saw? Was Matthew really there, or was this written in the 3rd century? Was John really there, or is this written well after? Because here's what it comes down to. If you want to lie about Jesus, you simply wait until everyone who knows the truth is dead. Then you can say whatever you want. And so I needed to know, is this written within the lifetime, not only of people who would have seen it, but it's hard to lie around people who will call you out. This is why when Paul says that there were 500 eyewitnesses of the risen Christ who saw him on the same day, most of whom were still alive at the time he was writing 1 Corinthians, that's a bold claim, and it puts
you say in the book that lies are hard to tell once, let alone countless times in geographic areas, and they all match up.
Yes, and is it possible to tell a lie? Of course. I always say this, it's possible for people to conspire and commit a conspiracy, but it's just really hard, and it requires certain conditions, none of which happen to exist when it comes to the disciples. So I make a case for that, the 5 attributes of successful conspiracies, and people sometimes misread that and say, are you saying there can never be a conspiracy? No. Of course there can be successful conspiracies. But by the way, if you think you know of a successful conspiracy, you've already demonstrated that it wasn't successful, because the ones that we get away with it are the ones you never catch. And that's why I think in the end, we have to be clear about how reasonable is that claim that they were lying. So again, I'm testing it. Is it early enough? Can it be verified by looking at archaeology, looking at other ancient writings, looking at the context of the kinds of words both inside and outside of Scripture, other ancient documents? Does it comport? Does it feel? Does it look? Is it testable as a 1st century kind of document? And then third, has it changed over time? Because if you believe that there's a Jesus of Nazareth, but he's just some dude who taught a few nice sermons, some ancient Jewish rabbi, but who ever worked a miracle, never walked on water, never fed 5,000, never rose from the grave. Well, if you think he's just a legend, all that legendary stuff was added later. Well, I needed to trace the transmission of the story. When I say the story, I don't mean that Jesus is a story, but I mean whatever narrative elements exist today in the Gospels. I want to know how early do they show up in history, and are they additive? Do you see from the earliest writings through the first 4 centuries, do you see a story growing, or is the story always the same? And so I needed to look at that. And finally, why do we lie? This is another complete chapter in the Truth and True Crime, because I learned this work in homicides. People only commit a homicide for one of 3 reasons. They commit it because it's sex, money, and power. It's as simple as that. Pursuit of power, pursuit of money, pursuit of sex. That's what drives people to do bad things, all kinds of bad things, but murder is just one of those. And people will say, well, what about self-defense? No, I'm talking about a murder is, okay, so there's killing and there's murder. Killing is not prohibited in Scripture because there are times when you will have to justify taking someone's life. For example, in Scripture, as it is in every state in the United States, if you are defending yourself from being killed, you can use whatever force is necessary, up to and including deadly force, to stop the attack. Self-defense is not a murder. Self-defense is a justifiable homicide. If you have a sniper who's killing 5-year-olds with a sniper rifle, and you want to take this guy out to save the next 5-year-old, well, it turns out taking someone's life to save an innocent is also a biblical justified homicide. And in every state in America, it's also it's not a murder. So I'm talking about what drives people to do murders. And those are always the pursuit of sex, money, or power. Now, why this is important to us is because if you're looking at, it's not just murders, it's any sin. Any sin any of us has ever committed was driven by sex, money, or power. And it's not just my view of this. This is also what John writes in his letters. It's that pursuit of pride. It's that pursuit, the lust of the eyes. That's the same. It's been driving people forever because they haven't changed biologically since the ancients. Okay, so the question becomes then, if that's this 3 motives for stupid behavior, it's also the 3 motives for lying. So if you think the gospel authors are lying, I know why they're lying. If they are lying, they're lying for one of those 3 reasons. But here's the problem: they have nothing to gain in any of those 3 areas. So that's the difficulty with this. You're basically saying that these folks would be willing to die and give their lives for a claim from which they get nothing. And that's one thing if you got one person who will do it, but when you get it over and over and over, it's not just, by the way, the disciples.
And the difference between extremists is they don't know that they're dying for a lie.
That's
right.
But
an apostle, if they truly saw Jesus and they saw the resurrected Jesus, they're not going to die for a lie they know is definitely a lie. They're not going to do it.
That's right. You and I get no evidence. Our death, our willingness to die for the claims of Christianity has no evidential value because lots of people die for what they don't know is a lie. But the people who would actually know, now that has high evidential value because they would know if they're telling a lie. And you might get 1 or 2 of them to have a reason, some other alternative reason. But to get everyone to do it, not just that, it's people like Barnabas and others who aren't part of the 12, who are giving their lives, spreading the gospel. These folks are doing this because they again, this is why I think in the end, we've got good reason. Now look, is there enough reason for you to deny Christianity is true? Of course. Why wouldn't God just compel all of us to believe it? Why wouldn't he come to every one of us at the age of 10 in a dream? Why wouldn't he just have it so that when we're born, we have an innate knowledge of the gospel that doesn't even need to be articulated? We just know it word for word. We know the entire... God certainly has the power to create humans like that. The problem, of course, is that those kinds of humans are much like robots, like AI, that can simply repeat back what it's been taught, but doesn't genuinely feel it. Doesn't genuinely offer it. So I could program my computer to say every morning, "Good morning, Jim, I love you." Does it mean my computer loves me? No, it's just been programmed to say that. It turns out it would have to have free agency in order to say, "I love you" with any meaning. Of course, the problem is that if I give it the free agency to say, "I love you," it might get up one morning and say, "I hate you." But that's the dangerous prerequisite to love. It's free agency. If God intended to create a world in which love could emerge at all, he has to create a world in which hate also exists. If God is going to create a world in which people could genuinely believe he exists, he'd have to create a world in which people have the freedom to genuinely disbelieve. And that's what we have. We have a world that there's more than enough reason to believe Christianity is true. But if you want to deny it, you'll find a way. And that's okay. That's the kind of world we live in by necessity, because you cannot design a world in which genuine belief and genuine love exist without the coexistence of hatred and disbelief, because it's all predicated by free agency.